Hi everyone! I finally got myself to make another YouTube tutorial. This time it's gonna be on how I made the spine / tail thing for my dragon lady and her horns. Let's start with the spine. I drew out my pattern on some newspaper and put it on my dress form so I could see if I liked the shape. Then I cut all my pieces out and used them as a pattern to trace it onto 1cm EVA foam. Then I cut it out with my box cutter until I had a bunch of pieces. I also cut some holes inside the pieces for some design elements. Next I took my dremel around all the edges to smooth them out and to also round the edges to make it look more natural. I always use a dust mask when I'm sanding EVA foam because this stuff gets everywhere and you don't want it in your lungs. I wanted to have some texture on there, so I started out with my box cutter and just making a bunch of cuts. Make sure you don't make them too deep or else it will fall apart. If you take a heat gun, all these little cuts will open up and they will get a bit bigger. For me, the texture was still a bit too subtle, so I also took my soldering iron and just burned a bunch of bigger, thicker cuts in there. And when you're using a soldering iron, make sure you open up a window because the fumes are not good for you. And then heat it up with my heat gun to both seal the foam so it will be easier to paint and to open up all those little cuts. And this is what they look like. Then I went in with some black acrylic paint. I think I put on 2 layers and then I took a sponge with a tiny bit of silver paint and I just dry brushed all over it to give some highlights. This is a very easy way to give some dimension to your paint. To attach my spine pieces together, I took my dremel again and I ironed off some of the texture of the back so I would have a flat surface to glue on. I just took some fabric from my dress and I hot glued that in place. I left a little bit of space between every spine piece. This way it will stay flexible. To attach all of this to my dress, I took my dremel again and I sanded off more of the texture. Then I hot glued little pieces of velcro in place. I took the rough side and glued that onto my foam piece. And then the softer side I glued onto my dress, again with hot glue. This was a very fast tryout just to make sure that everything fit, so I didn't actually stick it on really well on the top, but you can hopefully see it coming together. This is a really fun way to give some personal detail to the back of a dress and also hide a zipper. And then for the next part of this tutorial, I will show you how I made my horns. I started out again with a pattern made of newspaper that I put against my head to see if I liked the shape and size. And when I did, I cut it out of EVA foam with a box cutter. I used 3 layers for each horn, so I cut out 6 of these. Next, I glued them together with contact glue. And then I took my box cutter and rough cut it into the right shape. Be very careful not to cut your fingers, because it might be a bit awkward to hold it. Then I took my dremel and I just sanded off all the smaller parts to get it in the shape that I liked. For the horns, I did the same as I did for the spine. And I just went in with my soldering iron and cut in some grooves and texture. To smooth out the seams between the different pieces of foam, I used some silicone caulking. I just smear it inside of the seams and then I use a wet finger to smooth it out. And when I was done, I just heat sealed the foam here too, so I can put on a few layers of black acrylic and then dry brush the silver highlights with my sponge. To attach my horns, I'm using magnets. So I cut out a recessed piece the size of my magnets inside the bottom of my horns. And then I just hot glue those in place. And I'm using a lot of hot glue around the edges to make sure that they can't just accidentally pop out. And it can also really help to sand the bottom of the magnet first. Then I took a piece of black fabric. I put it on top of the bottom of my horn and then put the magnets on top so I could be sure that I'm using the right side of the magnet, that I don't accidentally reverse the polarity. And once I have those in place, I just pin the fabric so I can be sure that I'm sewing the magnets in the correct place. Just keep in mind that magnets work on your pins, so it can be a bit tricky. And then I very carefully pull off the fabric and just sew around the magnet using a zipper foot. Once I've sewn that, I literally just pin this piece of fabric inside of my wig. You can also hand sew it in place, but I like the fact that I can just remove it when I want to put these horns onto a different wig. And then you can just click them in place when you're wearing your costume. And that's it. So thank you for watching. If you want to see more of my tutorials, you can subscribe to my channel. I also have the tutorial on my wings and my dress on here. And if you want to see more pictures of my costume, you can check out my Facebook and Instagram.